A brief bit about the plot then. So, what Whitaker's character, Millen Garnett, is released on parole after serving a fairly lengthy sentence for the murder of Bill Aggerty's colleague. Bill Aggerty, the sheriff, played by Keitel, and the Garnett serves an 18-year stretch inside, and we find the opening frames. We see Aggerty near the border, and there's, we hear about one of the jobs is to keep an eye on the illegal immigrants coming across, which is pretty topical. We then switch to Whitaker's character is finding moments before he comes out of prison, and then he's met by the parole officer played by Bernstein, and I'm going to get on with the movie now rather than sort of dwell on this. Harvey Keitel's character points out to a number of the local population who put it into their heads that they have the right to detain illegals, and he puts them clear that they have no right to arrest them, detain them, do anything with them. All they have is the right to inform the Border Patrol. It's clarified succinctly by Keitel. Agent Smith, played by Bernstein, has clearly been brought out of retirement as the parole officer stroke social worker, based on the fact that the police force has been trimmed, and they certainly haven't got time to do any counselling or help in the welfare aspect. And she appears bright and enthusiastic, but that's quickly dampened when it's clear that she's going to be very much on her own. Spot the deliberate mistake. Agent Smith is in fact Blethyn, who we see earlier moving in, and not Bernstein. Bernstein's the mother of Barnett. A very strange scene in this Two Men in Town. We've got the parole officer going to see the sheriff. Keitel is the sheriff and the parole officer is Brenda, and he points out his concern that William, played by Whitaker, is now back in the community. He doesn't exactly spell out what he wants done with him, but written between the lines, one would suggest that he would prefer if he wasn't around. But Emily, Blethyn's character, who's the parole officer, points out that over the years she's built up an insight into, her job and how to deal with these offenders that are released on parole, and spells it out that in one word that you've got to have a degree of trust in that they're going to be law abiding. And the meeting then comes to an end, and the sheriff ends up inviting her to some sort of house party. I found it rather weird, really. Anyway, William's got himself a job on a farm, and he's also become the owner of a motorbike. The sheriff runs into William in an eatery, and he's looking for, well, he's displaying his anger that he's out of prison after only 8 years. He's in the face of William, and William, who's in the face of his Muslim book, shows considerable restraint. But Agatha seems to be determined to chastise William verbally, and it's pretty appalling, really. I guess that's what it's supposed to convince, the fact that he, having lost his deputy and aware of the family loss, can't give William a chance, a second chance, even though he's been inside for 18 years. It sort of encapsulates really the fact that people can't move on. They're unwilling to see that a person can change. I think that's the point. Once a devil, always a devil. Another scene that I started to toss around in my mind. He goes to see his parole officer to tell her that he's got a job and that he'd opened a bank account, and then he mentions that he's got a date and tells her that it's the girl in the bank. And the parole officer was very positive about the job and the bank account and the girlfriend, although it made a wisecrack about being a bit of a quick operator, and then basically told him, or asked him, had he told the girl in the bank about his past. And he reacted somewhat unfavourably. Although it wasn't said, I sensed that he was saying, well, do you tell everybody everything about your life in the first minutes that you meet them? And the parole officer seemed to think that it was such an integral part of him that it must be told at the earliest possible moment, because it's the truth, implying that if you don't tell the person, then you're being deceitful. I find this quite prejudicial, really. What do you think? Earlier, the parole officer had warned William about, I guess, a felon who's lives in the community, and suggested that William give him a wide berth. Unfortunately, he's in the bar with the girl, and he runs into this Mexican type figure who greets him as to say, after 18 years, William tries to stay polite, but to remove himself from the situation being with the guy, and it proves to be really difficult. And the Mexican guy can't understand why William doesn't want to stop and have a chat with him and share old times and blah 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 blah. It's interesting how you get into a situation where it's, if you're in the same place, the same town, how can you avoid people, and how can you avert the potential stigma? Oh, he's back with that crowd again scenario. So a few interesting sort of issues about behaviour, changing your behaviour, changing your image. You could do so much yourself, but for it to work, or guaranteed to work, others have got to change as well, and that is beyond your control. William's relationship with Teresa, who's a Mexican illegal immigrant, starts to blossom. At the same time, though, the Mexican felon, who he's been told to stay away, continues to try and drag him back into the mire, and there are a few scenes which illustrate that, as William attempts to get the guy to understand that he's got a new path now. What I find well done, even though I couldn't understand it, was that William speaks Spanish, and some of the scenes with Teresa are in Spanish, but on my copy there were no subtitles, which was a bit frustrating. But they both share something in common, really, as highlighted by one critic. She's not in her country, and can't be, because she can't make ends meet. And William really is in his country, but he'd probably be fared better if he were elsewhere, because he's constantly having to come to terms with the fact that he's a target by the sheriff, a target by this felon, and generally finding it difficult to steer down that new road, even with the help of his religion. The cop comes by William's farm, has a word with the boss, starts to rant about the fact that this guy is out free as a bird after 18 years, and it's up to him. He'd be out of town. Of course, the boss is a close friend, and so shortly after, he fires William for nothing. Parole officer goes to Agati, and they have a confrontation. He's clearly wants the guy out, and she basically says if he continues to interfere, she's going to make an official complaint. And Agati, who's one of these characters who thinks he's got a law unto himself, tells her to get out. The problem now that William's got is, can he live in this neighbourhood with Agati? All that we've seen would suggest not. But he's got 3 years to do before he's free. We also see the despair with regard to Emily, the parole officer. She goes to visit her other client that we met earlier, who wanted to go back to his family to finish his parole, and she had to tell him that it couldn't happen. He decides to end it all, and she finds the body, and her frustration pours over. The parole officer, determined to try and avoid the sheriff and his honkies driving William to commit an offence, is desperate and arranges for William to go to see his mother, who's out of county, played by Ellen Burstyn. And one of the highlights of the movie, really, in terms of scenes, is this scene with Whitaker and Burstyn talking about correspondence letters that he'd written, and her lack of a response, either send it to him or reading them. It's very sensitive, very painful. The Mexican felon comes to Teresa's place. They have an exchange in Spanish, and then there's a fight, and he beats her quite badly. What's William going to do when he knows about this? The ending is probably easy for you to work out. I like the sparse cinematography as the sun rises and William walks off in the direction of the sun. This is quite an interesting movie, really. A simple sort of story, but I guess one that happens pretty often.